It's my pleasure to invite Director Oral, who will be addressing the subject of the regulation of marine litter pollution under the law of the sea. You're an expert, Nilüfer, so go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Infante. How wonderful to be on a panel that you're moderating and to follow my dear friend, Professor Maria Gavinelli, on her very interesting presentation indeed. But I first have to thank the Korean Society for International Law, dear Professor Kwon Gwan Lee, my colleague now at the International Law Commission. I congratulate him, and also the Korean Foreign Ministry for inviting me to be part of this very important conference. And regrettably, I have not been able to travel and be with all of you, so this is my loss. Anyway, today my topic is going to be on the law of the sea and the issue of regulating marine plastic pollution. I won't go into the plastic, microplastic litter, but just marine plastic pollution. So first of all, the plastic revolution took place in the 1950s, and we have to admit that it has had also a lot of benefits for us. But following this, the plastic crisis has emerged, and particularly for the marine environment for the 21st century. Marine debris, litter, plastics, microplastics are today all major threats to the marine environment and marine life. And at the time that the convention was being negotiated, indeed, pollution was an issue, but it was not plastic pollution. Today, it is the prominent source of pollution. So just to give you some numbers, about 300 million tons of plastic are produced every day. 12 million tons at least of this plastic ends up in the ocean every year. And of course, we've all seen the photos of marine species entangled, the mammals, the fish, eating plastics, and the seabirds. So the photos are very visual. I don't have any today for you. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. And we also know that the source of marine debris and plastics are primarily land-based, about 80%, and from human activities. However, fishing activities are also a source. This is from the abandoned, lost, or otherwise discarded fishing gear, the nets, the ropes, aquaculture industry, and shipping. So what I'm going to do in the time I have is to go over some of the steps that are being taken at the global and regional levels to address this absolutely pressing problem of marine plastic pollution, but of course, starting with the Law of the Sea Convention. Now, I have to say that this is a huge topic. It's dynamic, it's complex, so I cannot be exhaustive at all, but I'll try and hit on some of the main points. Now, first of all, the Law of the Sea Convention. It's important to really underline that the convention is really the only global instrument that addresses all sources of marine pollution. And of course, for our topic today, we start off with whether marine plastic pollution falls under the Law of the Sea Convention. And if we look, of course, at the definition under Article 1, Paragraph 4, the introduction by man directly or indirectly of substances or energy into the marine environment, which results or is likely to result in such deleterious effects as harm to living resources and marine life, it's clear marine plastic pollution is a pollution that would fall under the Law of the Sea Convention. What's important about the Law of the Sea Convention, I'm going to go through these quickly, it establishes very clear obligations for states with direct applicability to marine pollution in general, but in particular plastic pollution. We know the famous Article 192, clear obligation for states to protect and preserve the marine environment. Article 194, Paragraph 1, again, very clear obligation on states to adopt the necessary measures to prevent, reduce, and control pollution from all sources at the global, regional, and national levels. Now, Article 194, Paragraph 3 specifically addresses the requirement to take measures that will address to the fullest extent possible the release of toxic, harmful, or noxious substances, especially those which are persistent from land-based sources or from the atmosphere or by dumping. So clearly we have here marine plastics. Then Article 194, paragraph 5 we know applies to the protection and preservation of rare or fragile ecosystems, as well as the habitat of depleted, threatened, or endangered species and other forms of marine life. And again, marine plastic pollution is having a very significant impact, deleterious impact on this. Now, importantly, Article 197 requires for states to cooperate on a global or regional basis, either directly or through competent international organizations in formulating and elaborating international rules, standards, and recommended practices and procedures. And this becomes relevant later on. I'll explain why. We know, of course, of the provisions on land-based sources of pollution, and importantly, the Law of the Sea Convention, and this was a point that was highlighted in one of the UNEP reports, remains as the only global instrument that is of a binding nature that applies to land-based sources of pollution. We don't have a global binding instrument. Article 123 is also important because it provides the foundation for regional cooperation and coordination around enclosed and semi-enclosed seas, particularly vulnerable to marine plastic pollution. And of course, this is something that directly entails the work of the UNEP Regional Seas Program that I hope to get to later on. We know that Law of the Sea Convention applies to dumping, vessel sources of pollution. And here I would like to talk about the International Maritime Organization, which is implicitly recognized in the convention as the competent international organization. And their Article 211 does mandate that states acting through the IMO establish international rules, standards to prevent, reduce, and control pollution of the marine environment from vessels. And again, this certainly applies to marine plastic pollution. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the IMO, which has been taking some action to address marine plastic pollution. In 2018, the Marine Environmental Protection Committee adopted the IMO action plan to address marine plastic litter from ships that includes also fishing vessels. The action plan includes a number of measures that governments are to implement by 2025, but it also includes cooperation with other international organizations, and this is important, such as the FAO and the UNEP. For example, IMO is one of the partners with the UNEP-led Global Partnership for Marine Litter. It's responsible for examining the sea-based sources of marine litter together with FAO. Now, one of the activities undertaken by the IMO was to do a study on marine litter in relation to various waste streams under the London Convention and Protocol. And this report was published in 2016. And again, measures and actions are being taken there. Now, based on a request from the UN General Assembly, the IMO actually studied the effectiveness of Annex 5 of MARPOL in relation to marine debris, and as a result of that study, revised Annex 5 of the MARPOL conventions, which is the important convention for shipping on prevention of marine pollution. And one of the revisions concern the definition of garbage that also would include all plastics. And this is provided more detail in the regulations. Now, another instrument, while not an IMO instrument, but very important for shipping, is the Basel Convention on the Control of Transboundary Movements of Hazardous Waste and their Disposal. And here, of course, the Basel Convention has undertaken some important revisions, and that includes giving clarity to which plastic wastes are hazardous and are subject to the prior informed consent and those that are not. Now, of course, when we talk about the Law of the Sea Convention, we also have to recognize the important role of the Tribunal for the Law of the Sea and also, of course, the arbitral awards that have been taken under Part 15. And I know that the current president of ICLS, Judge Hoffman, he gave a very good summary of some of the important cases that have contributed and developed our understanding of the Convention on Protection and Preservation of the Marine Environment. And that includes from due diligence obligation, understanding the broader concept of conservation, that also incorporates biodiversity, i.e. fishing, and also the erga omnes nature of the obligation to protect and preserve the marine environment. And perhaps there will be a case in the future of marine plastic pollution for ICLS. Now, I also had mentioned that fisheries is another activity that is a source of marine plastic pollution. And here again, the Law of the Sea Convention provides a framework. So the UN Fish Stocks Agreement, of course, it's an implementing agreement under the Law of the Sea Convention, is concerned with the conservation and management of straddling fish stocks and highly migratory fish stocks in areas beyond national jurisdiction and under national jurisdiction. But it also has important provisions relevant to marine plastics. For example, under Article 5, paragraph F, states are required, inter alia, to minimize catch by lost or abandoned gear. And as I stated earlier, this is an important source of marine plastic pollution. Paragraph G of Article 5 also requires states to protect biodiversity. And clearly that would include prevention of debris from lost fishing gear, phantom fishing gear, and that. However, the limitation is that the Fish Stocks Agreement is limited in its scope. It does not apply to all fishing activities. And here, of course, the regional fishery management organizations have an important role to play. Now, at the regional level, there is, of course, the UNEP Regional Seas Program. Of course, it predates the Law of the Sea Convention. Nonetheless, as I stated earlier, it is an important forum for the implementation of Article 123, regional cooperation. There are 18 regional seas programs. However, they are not identical. They have different regimes, different instruments. Not all of them have land-based source protocols. Some do, many do, but many do not. And again, this is important because marine plastic pollution is primarily a land-based source problem. Now, out of all the regional seas program, and I think Maria Gavinelli, you'll appreciate this, only the Mediterranean Sea Program has a binding instrument. It adopted the Regional Plan on Marine Litter Management in the Mediterranean under Article 15 of the Land-Based Sources Protocol. So there's more that needs to be done on this within the Regional Seas Program. I know the region I'm in, the COP-C region, is also very active on this, but they do not have an instrument per se. Now, as I come to the end, I just want to make mention of a very important activity that's been taking place at the UN Environmental Assembly. Since 2014, the UN Environmental Assembly has been dealing with marine plastic pollution. It established an ad hoc expert group on marine litter and microplastics. And last year, they basically submitted their recommendations of the various options, which was either strengthening existing instruments or perhaps a new marine plastic treaty. And this is going to be considered hopefully this year by the Assembly. So what it seems to be, though, the indication is that there is growing support for a new treaty. And the question I would ask is, does this compete or overshadow the role of the Law of the Sea Convention? Should such a new treaty be adopted? And if so, should it be under the Law of the Sea Convention as an implementing agreement? In my view, I actually don't think that it does. It's clear that the Law of the Sea Convention does require cooperation by states, and I mentioned specifically Article 197. And to me, this is actually a fulfillment of that cooperation duty by, even if it's not directly under the law of the sea convention itself, but it is under the UN, and in this case, the Environmental Assembly. Anyway, I will stop here, and I hope that we will have an opportunity to discuss a little bit more, but thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Director Oral. It has been a very rich presentation and encouraging and also a critical one.